The man who had built a career on making others pay was about to be presented with the bill for his entire life. Delivered not by a disgruntled contractor or a disgruntled student, but by a congresswoman from Texas holding a receipt from Walmart. The desert heat of Phoenix, Arizona, was merciless that evening, a fitting backdrop for the political incineration about to take place. 50 million screens across the nation were tuned in, anticipating a confrontation that was structured less like a town hall and more like an impromptu cross-examination. For years, one central claim had defined the former president's economic philosophy: China pays the tariffs. The figure, repeated ad nauseum across rally stages and social media feeds, had, by Crockett's meticulous count, reached a staggering 47 affirmations since the spring of 2025. 47 times he had assured the American public that a foreign adversary was footing the bill for his grand trade strategy. Jasmine Crockett, walking onto the stage with the quiet confidence of a prosecutor, carried the one item that cut through the noise of any political slogan: evidence. It was not complex economic modeling, nor was it hidden in the dense jargon of a legal brief. It was the simple, undeniable truth of the American checkout line. She approached the podium, setting down a chrome shopping cart, the kind everyone knew, the symbol of daily survival, and extracted its contents. The items were deliberately mundane: a jumbo box of children's cereal, a value pack of diapers, a generic coffee maker. These were the staples of the American working-class life, now transformed into exhibits in a trial about economic deceit. The atmosphere in the auditorium, packed with a deliberately balanced mix of voters, crackled with nervous energy. Trump, seated a mere 10 feet away, in a posture of practiced defiance, sensed the shift. He was accustomed to adulation or scripted opposition. This felt like neither. This felt real. Crockett produced a thermal receipt, a long, flimsy scroll that unfolded like a financial indictment. The tally, she stated, for the exact same 9 items purchased that morning was $847. She then produced a similar receipt from the previous year, $712. The difference, she articulated, letting the number settle heavily in the silence: $135. That is not an act of God. That is not a spontaneous fluctuation of the market. Her gaze locked onto the president, challenging the very core of his policy. That is not even the natural drift of inflation, which your Federal Reserve was steadily conquering before your administration unilaterally applied a new national sales tax. The question, Mr. President, is simple enough for a third grader. If China is paying the tariffs, why did the essential cart of an American mother cost me $135 more this year? The rhetorical question hung in the air, a simple equation that dismantled a multi-billion-dollar lie. For a man who had successfully navigated thousands of complex lawsuits, this basic arithmetic seemed to paralyze him. There were no campaign surrogates to pivot for him, no protective firewall of lawyers to invoke privilege, only the silent, unblinking eyes of the cameras and the judgment of a nation struggling to balance its budget. The town hall location, Phoenix, was a calculated choice, the epicenter of American cost of living anxiety. A state defined by its razor-thin political margins and its population of retirees who depended on fixed incomes, all watching their purchasing power erode while being told the economy was winning. Everyone present knew this was more than political theater. It was the moment the hidden ledger of American commerce was opened for inspection. The moderator's attempts to regain control of the format were politely ignored. Crockett, leaning into the table now, used the props, the cereal box, the children's shoes, as markers of the crime. She meticulously traced the tariff trail: the Canadian wheat, the Chinese cardboard, the plastic, the glue, 4 separate tariff taxes embedded into one simple box. And who pays the 4 separate taxes? Sir, not the Chinese government, not the Canadian farmer, not the conglomerate corporation. The cost is passed on, through the retailer, to Mrs. Rodriguez in row 3, trying to feed her grandchildren. The camera focused on the elderly woman, her quiet nod a silent but devastating confirmation. The receipt, coiled on the table like a sleeping viper, was the only witness needed. Trump offered the expected defense. Billions were flowing into the Treasury. Crockett countered with precision, quoting the Republican-appointed Federal Reserve Chair, Jerome Powell, who explicitly stated, Tariffs are causing most of the inflation overshoot we are currently experiencing. The economic truth, she implied, was apolitical. The numbers did not care about campaign slogans. The Tax Foundation, a nonpartisan entity, had put the number on the table: $1.200 annually, extracted from the pocket of the average American household. This, she declared, was not America first. This was American families pay first. The economic debate had been reframed, transitioning from a discussion about global trade policy to a reckoning over the price of a small pair of pink children's shoes. A 40% tariff increase on a product that would be outgrown in 4 months. The human cost, she ensured the audience understood, was blisters on children's feet and sleepless nights for their parents. Also, a politician could claim victory over an adversary. The first round was over, and the evidence was undeniable. The silence that followed Crockett's devastating initial salvo, the indictment hidden inside a Walmart receipt, was quickly absorbed by a rising tide of discomfort among the Republican attendees. Trump, visibly struggling to pivot from the retail reality check, attempted to claim the tariffs were successfully resurrecting American manufacturing. The tariffs are bringing back manufacturing. We are seeing factories opening, he insisted, his voice already reaching the familiar pitch of defensive bluster. Crockett did not permit the deflection. She interrupted, her tone sharp, demanding empirical evidence. Where? Show me. Give me one factory that opened because of your tariffs. A name, a location, a number of jobs created. She immediately countered his unsubstantiated claim with documented economic casualty reports. Iowa farmers who lost their essential soybean markets when China retaliated and moved to Brazilian suppliers. Michigan auto workers whose shifts were being cut because steel costs had ballooned by 40% in 2 years. Small business owners in her own Texas district who could no longer afford to stock their shelves due to import costs. The policy, she argued, was not a strategic victory but a transfer of economic pain from Beijing to American heartland communities. The audience, initially divided, was now united in recognition. The silent nods of the retirees and the tight-jawed expressions of the small business owners confirmed that Crockett was not debating policy theory, she was describing their financial reality. The simple pink shoes she held up, now costing 40% more, epitomized the choice: taxing a child's essential needs for political posturing. That is not an economic policy, Mr. President, she concluded, her voice softening with calculated effect. That is a choice to make American families pay first. Before Trump could find a coherent response to the tariff crisis, Crockett moved, seamless and relentless, to the next exposed vulnerability in his ledger of promises. She retrieved a prop far more symbolic than the groceries, a large, poster-sized photograph of the border wall, an image of rusting steel bollards standing broken and unfinished in the Arizona scrubland, tumbleweeds accumulating at its base. The transition was immediate, the new evidence directly referencing the core of the previous deception. If you thought the tariff lie was bad, wait until you hear about the wall. The implication hung heavy in the air. The president, she pointed out, had a predictable, decades-long pattern of promising that someone else would pay the price. And no promise was more iconic, more deeply ingrained in the political consciousness, than the chant that had defined a movement: Mexico will pay for the wall. She held the photograph aloft, turning slowly to ensure the 50 million viewers saw the physical, rusting monument to a broken promise. The rallying cry, "Who's going to pay for the wall?" and the thunderous response were now a painful memory. A political performance that had secured votes but never secured payment. So, the question remains, Mr. President, Crockett challenged flatly, how much has Mexico paid for this wall? Trump's face cycled through a series of uncomfortable micro-expressions, defiance giving way to an attempt at calculation. He muttered something about beneficial trade deals and renegotiations. Crockett delivered the quantifiable truth with surgical precision. The answer is zero. Not a peso, not a centavo. Mexico has paid exactly nothing for your wall. She cited the Congressional Budget Office, the Mexican government, and the simple reality of basic accounting. Everyone who could count confirmed the deception. She pointed at the rust on the metal barrier. The financial burden, she revealed, had been entirely absorbed by the American taxpayer. She then dropped the number that chilled the room: $46.6 billion in a single spending bill, money that should have gone to domestic programs, to Medicaid, to SNAP benefits for hungry children, diverted to construct a barrier that was, by all evidence, structurally and financially unsound. You have a pattern, she stated, the accusation now elevated from a single policy critique to a character assessment. A very specific, very predictable pattern. You promise that someone else will pay, China, Mexico, anyone but you. And when the bill arrives, when the check is due, who reaches into their pocket? American families, every single time. The president's defensive insistence that the wall was securing the border was instantly overridden by the brutal reality Crockett shot back. The wall was rusting in the desert. Miles of it unfinished, funding tied up in legal battles, contractors walking off the job. It was a failure of engineering, logistics, and, above all, integrity. She shifted the focus from the political implications to the predatory implications. This was not a policy disagreement about border security, it was a repeated, reliable mechanism. Promise that another party will pay, collect the political benefits, rallies, chants, votes, and then leave the people who believed the lie, the American taxpayers, holding the bill. The two central promises of his political career, China pays and Mexico pays, were exposed as twin pillars of deception. Both funded by the citizens he claimed to champion. The silence that descended this time was heavy with the weight of recognized betrayal. The crowd did not know what was coming next, but they sensed a deeper financial rot was about to be uncovered, moving the confrontation from the realm of politics to the realm of certified fraud. The confrontation transitioned seamlessly from public spending to private deceit. The exposed deception over the wall and the tariffs served as the perfect predicate for the next stage of Crockett's indictment, the systematic fraud committed in the pursuit of personal wealth. She held up a thick manila folder, the contents heavy with the unmistakable feel of court documents, and introduced the third element of the pattern, Trump University. This was not a real estate venture, it was a marketing scheme disguised as education, complete with the promise that for a tuition fee, reaching as high as $35 for the Gold Elite program, Donald Trump would personally dispense the secrets to success and riches. 6,000 people, she recounted, had bought into that fantasy. They were retirees, widows, and ambitious individuals who saw the famous name as a guaranteed pathway to prosperity. They were wrong. Crockett began to read from the folder, the details of the victims' lives cutting through the political noise. She spoke of Bob Gu, a 76-year-old man who invested $35 of his retirement savings only to receive basic real estate knowledge readily available online. She revealed the dark irony of the hand-picked instructors, noting Trump's own sworn testimony that he had never interviewed them, never reviewed their credentials, and often didn't even know their names. The instruction was delegated, the trust was stolen. Then came the story of Mrs. Williams, a 68-year-old widow who used a $200 life insurance payout, her security, her husband's final gift, to enroll in the premium program. Crockett's voice was low, emphasizing the cruelty of the con. What Mrs. Williams received for her life savings was a binder of generic information and a photograph with a cardboard cutout of Donald Trump. The human cost was not just financial, it was the loss of confidence. The years spent questioning her own judgment. You promised these people they would get rich, Crockett stated, looking directly at the president. The only person who got rich was you, Mr. President, from their life insurance, their retirement savings, and their hope. Trump finally found his voice. A desperate attempt to pivot to a familiar defense, the self-reported 98% satisfaction rate from internal surveys. Crockett's reply was instantaneous and devastatingly logical. Then why did you pay $25 million to settle the lawsuit? The settlement amount, she stressed, was the physical manifestation of guilt. Satisfied customers do not file class action lawsuits involving 6,000 plaintiffs. The New York Attorney General, she cited, had declared the settlement a major victory for the victims of his fraudulent university. She reminded the audience of Trump's previous, defiant refusal to settle any case, claiming only guilty people settled. The decision to write a $25 million check was a tacit admission that a jury trial would be worse, the legal equivalent of being caught with the hand in the till. Connecting the dots for the audience, Crockett returned to her central theme. The pattern was now indisputable. China will pay. The American family pays the tariff. Mexico will pay. The American taxpayer pays for the wall. You will get rich from Trump University. The student loses their savings. She contrasted the fate of the victims. The Trump University plaintiffs, though wronged, eventually received a settlement, 80 to 90 cents on the dollar after years of grueling legal battle. The families currently paying the tariffs, however, received no settlement, no legal recourse, and no acknowledgement of fraud, only higher prices at the checkout and the repeated assurance that China was paying. The third round solidified the personal nature of the financial deception. The pattern was not merely political incompetence, but a deliberate, lifelong strategy of extraction. The narrative now plunged deeper into Trump's pre-political life, exposing the foundational methodology of his business career. If Trump University was the fraud aimed at the aspiring wealthy, his treatment of contractors was the fraud aimed at the working class. Crockett retrieved a thick stack of papers, a silent and weighty testament to decades of exploitation, and dropped them onto the table with a resonant thud. The number she delivered was staggering: 3.500 lawsuits. Not a figure pulled from partisan rhetoric, but documented by a USA Today investigation. The countless times Donald Trump's companies had been sued by the people who built his empire: the electricians, the plumbers, the carpenters, the small, family-run businesses. She focused on a single, poignant example: the Edward Friel family business in Philadelphia. 3 generations of cabinet makers whose skill adorned Trump's Taj Mahal casino in Atlantic City. They delivered beautiful, museum-quality work. The agreed price was $83. The payment received was $0. Crockett recreated the brutal exchange. When the Friels complained, when they explained that $83 was their operating budget for months, Trump's response was an act of pure financial intimidation. "Sue me." She explained the cold, calculated logic behind the challenge. Suing a billionaire costs far more than the sum owed, forcing the small business owner into an impossible choice: bankruptcy or acceptance of total loss. The Friels' cabinet-making legacy ended after 3 generations. The family business, the product of decades of reputation and craftsmanship, vanished because Trump elected not to pay a single bill. "You did not negotiate," Crockett stated with powerful clarity. "You stole." Negotiation is agreement before work. Theft is accepting the work and then refusing to pay for it. She defined the strategy for the audience. It was a business model built on exploitation. A deliberate tactic to hire small businesses that lacked the legal resources to fight back, take their labor, and dare them to litigate. His wealth and access to legal firepower were weapons, used against people who depended on prompt payment for their survival. Crockett asked the small business owners in the audience to raise their hands. A visible forest of raised arms demonstrating the widespread relatability of the betrayal. She then narrated the small business nightmare, the celebrated contract, the late nights spent completing quality work, the hopeful invoice, followed by the terrifying silence, and finally, the insult, a lowball offer of 30 cents on the dollar. Take it or sue him. She reiterated that this was not merely tough negotiation but predatory behavior. It was the same pattern seen all night. China pays. American consumer pays. Mexico pays. American taxpayer pays. The contractor will accept whatever I decide to give him. The contractor loses his business and life savings. The small, pink children's shoes were brought back into the argument, connecting the unpaid contractors in Atlantic City to the workers making shoes in Vietnam, all victims of a system where Trump preferred to impose a tax on their work rather than pay his own bills. The emotional climax arrived when an older man in the third row, a veteran wearing service pins, stood up, his voice cracking with memory. His son had owned a drywall company, subcontracted for a Trump property, and was never paid, leading to bankruptcy and the loss of his family and home. Crockett's response was a moment of shared solidarity. "You are not alone. Sir, there are 3.500 families just like yours. The accumulation of personal losses, the lost businesses, the destroyed retirement, the trauma of the students, had transcended politics. The total evidence now laid bare a lifelong pattern of financial parasitism. The fourth round established that the president's entire career was built on dodging financial responsibility. Now, Crockett brought out the final, irrefutable tool, the calculator. It was an old-fashioned device. Printing a paper tape, a deliberate choice to ground the abstract nature of millions and billions in tactile, undeniable arithmetic. The math, she announced, does not care about politics or feelings. It is the language of truth. She began punching in the numbers, the machine clicking in the silence. First, the personal settlements and verdicts, the costs of Trump's mistakes that could not be avoided. Trump University fraud settlement, $25 million. E. Jean Carroll verdict 1, sexual abuse, defamation, $5 million. E. Jean Carroll verdict 2, defamation, $83.3 million. Combined liability total, $113.3 million. She tore off the tape, holding up the stark figures. This was the cost of his personal recklessness, paid out to victims of fraud and sexual abuse, confirmed by 2 separate juries of random American citizens. She challenged his persistent claim of innocence. At what point did every person and institution holding him accountable cease to be part of a conspiracy and simply become the truth? What truly mattered, she stressed, was that the payment was not a consequence but a cost of doing business, an amount that taught him nothing because it didn't hurt him personally. She quantified the opportunity cost. $113 million could have funded full college rides for 4,000 students or built affordable housing for 500 families. Instead, it was spent cleaning up the personal and corporate messes of one man. The focus then pivoted back to the scale of the financial burden placed on the public. Crockett returned to the numbers that affected every viewer. Tariff cost, per household, $1.200 per year. Total American households, 130 million. Total annual cost to families, $156 billion. She wrote the figure in large, unambiguous numerals, $156.000.000. This was the amount, she reminded them, extracted annually from grocery budgets and retirement savings, all while he claimed China was paying. She added the other public burdens. Wall funding, taxpayer cost, $46.6 billion. Corporate tax cuts, over 10 years, $1.9 trillion. The final calculation synthesized the numbers into a stunning conclusion. In your time in public office, you have overseen the largest transfer of wealth from working families to corporations and government coffers than any president in modern history. And you did it by telling them the entire time that someone else was footing the bill. Crockett framed his entire economic policy not as governance, but as a confidence trick, a shell game played on a national scale. The difference between him and a street hustler running a 3-card Monte game was only the venue and the scale of the penalty for getting caught. One went to jail, the other went to the White House. But the core con was the same: convince people they're going to win, take their money while they're distracted, and move on to the next mark. The heavy, mathematical silence confirmed that the magnitude of the extraction was undeniable. The numbers were stacked on the table, a paper trail of betrayal visible to 50 million people. The final, climactic round was stripped of props and numbers. It was a confrontation of character, pure and unadulterated. Crockett stood before Trump, the stage lighting cruelly illuminating the tension, and posed the ultimate, career-defining question. I have one last question for you, Mr. President. Her voice was measured, deliberately quiet, forcing the audience to lean in, amplifying the weight of her words. In 78 years of life, in 50 years of business, in 8 years of politics, can you name one time, just one time, when you paid the price for something you did wrong? The conditions were explicit, not a settlement paid by someone else, not a bankruptcy where creditors absorbed the loss, but a genuine consequence that personally hurt Donald John Trump, a price he could not buy back, a lesson he could not deflect. She waited. The silence was excruciating. 10 seconds, 20, 30. The air in the auditorium seemed to cease moving. The sound of a cough was instantly muffled. For a man whose entire existence was defined by his voice, his attacks, And his relentless stream of words. The inability to speak was a historical anomaly. Crockett gently pushed the point. You cannot answer. Because there is no answer. She began to narrate the catalog of his life through the lens of avoided accountability. When his businesses failed with 6 bankruptcies, the contractors, the employees, the investors paid, he bought a new yacht. When Trump University was exposed as fraud, he paid a settlement that was a mere rounding error to his net worth. While the students lost years of their lives, when he was found liable for sexual abuse, he paid millions and continued his life of rallies and attacks, while the victim carried the trauma forever. She moved closer, closing the distance, forcing the uncomfortable intimacy of the confrontation. His sweat was visible under the powerful lights. Every single time the pattern is the same. You cause the damage, someone else cleans it up. You take the credit, someone else takes the blame. You move on to the next thing. Someone else is left behind picking up the pieces. Crockett then delivered the final, definitive character assessment. He is not a businessman. He does not create value. He extracts it, a parasite taking from contractors, students, and families, leaving wreckage behind. He is not a dealmaker. He does not seek mutual benefit. He finds ways to make others pay for his gain. Refusing to honor agreements, that is taking, not dealing. He is not a leader. Leaders accept responsibility, admit mistakes, and fix them. He only blames others, the media, the deep state, the judges. That is cowardice dressed in a red hat. She turned to the audience, shifting the focus back to their shared reality. She asked them how many of them had ever paid for their own mistakes, a job lost, a bill missed, a choice that genuinely cost them. Almost every hand rose, a silent, powerful affirmation of their shared humanity and their fundamental difference from the man on the stage. He is not one of you, she asserted. He has never been one of you. He does not know what it feels like to worry about a car inspection or a child's braces or choosing between groceries and medicine. To him, you are not people. You are marks. You are revenue. You are the ones who pay. She gave him one last, final chance to answer the question. The camera zooming in on his pale, immobile face. The minute of silence that ensued was the most potent indictment of the evening. The silence itself became the answer. That is what I thought, Crockett stated, gathering her collection of evidence, the receipts, the calculator, the court documents, methodically tucking them back into her bag. The deliberate slowness emphasized the finality of the moment. The conversation was over, not because of a time limit, but because one party had nothing left to say. She turned away from the silent figure of the president and addressed the 50 million viewers directly. The question was no longer about his character, it was about the nation's choice. The question now is not whether Donald Trump will change. He is 78 years old. He will not change. He cannot change. The question is whether we will change. Whether we will keep falling for the same con over and over. Or whether we will finally say, enough. No more. The bill stops here. We are done paying for your mistakes. Crockett walked off the stage, her footsteps echoing in the massive auditorium. Behind her, Donald Trump remained seated, utterly alone under the harsh lights, surrounded by the physical evidence of his lifelong financial evasion. For the first time in his public life, the man who always commanded the narrative, who always had an attack ready, was left with nothing but silence and the receipts piled on the table. The applause that eventually erupted was not the roaring adulation of a rally, it was the deep, cathartic sound of recognition. Mrs. Rodriguez, the retiree in the third row, was openly crying, a release of frustration and validation. The veteran sat nodding, a silent witness to the confirmation of his son's betrayal decades earlier. In living rooms across America, something fundamental had shifted. The immediate aftermath was a political and cultural shockwave known instantly as the Phoenix effect. The clip, "Who Always Pays," became a viral phenomenon, reaching 52 million views in 24 hours. The hashtag Trump never pays trended globally, fueled not by political operatives but by ordinary people sharing their own stories of being cheated, overcharged, or abandoned. The phrase, "the Trump tax," entered the national lexicon, an instantly recognizable shorthand for the difference between a fair price and the price inflated by political maneuvering. Poll numbers for the president plummeted 15 points in 2 weeks. The damage concentrated among crucial suburban women and independent voters. The business world, sensing the shifting tide, began a quiet but definitive disengagement. Republican senators, suddenly aware of their constituents' rising grocery bills, publicly demanded a comprehensive review of trade and tariff policy, avoiding any direct mention of the town hall but proving its power. Walmart and Target issued coordinated, carefully worded releases confirming that recent trade policies were directly forcing price increases onto working families, a public acknowledgement of Crockett's central argument. The political consequence was structural, a Supreme Court ruling shortly thereafter. A narrow 5-4 decision declared Trump's emergency tariffs exceeded presidential authority, confirming that the power to tax belongs solely to Congress. The administration was forced to roll back 30% of the tariffs. A defeat framed as a strategy, too little, too late. In Texas, the political landscape shifted for the first time in decades. Crockett's campaign for the Senate shattered fundraising records, collecting millions in small dollar donations, many averaging $47, a deliberate symbolic reference to the number of times Trump had repeated the tariff lie. The ultimate victory was not immediate electoral success, but the crystallization of a central truth. The con was exposed, defined, and named. The most lasting image, beyond the shopping cart and the calculator tape, was the final, agonizing silence. 78 years of dodging consequences, 50 years of taking, 8 years of political deception, and not one single example of accountability. The truth had finally found its vernacular expression. The American people, the ones who always paid, were finally ready to demand the bill be paid by the man who owed it.